Even if both Portugal and Spain were part of a union at some point, and even if Spain invaded Portugal during the Napoleonic period, the Portuguese lands weren't practically conquered and annexed into the Spanish kingdom. The single mainland neighbor of Portugal is Spain, a much larger country. Some centuries ago, Spain was one of the biggest powers of the world, expanding itself in the New World and in Asia, having large overseas colonies guarded by its incredible armies and navies. Considering their former power and having a smaller neighbor cornered at the Atlantic coast, we may ask why Portugal wasn't conquered by Spain. We have to go through some history to answer that. The Iberian Peninsula was known as Hispania, a name given by the Romans. However, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the territory was lost to the tribe of Visigoths, which ended up ruling the whole peninsula. But this was temporary. Their new home would be conquered in the next period by a new force emerging far away. Starting as a religious movement in the hot desert of Arabia, Islam spread rapidly mainly due to the early military successes against Eastern Romans and Persians. Arab dynasties expanded more and more at a huge rate, reaching the shores of the Atlantic Ocean at the end of the 7th century. In these empires, the religion was embraced by more and more people and became dominant in the caliphates. It is believed that Hispania was one of the former Roman provinces where the Latin language and culture grew deep roots. On April 30th, 711, Muslim general Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in Gibraltar. By the end of his campaign, most of the peninsula was brought under Islamic rule. Islam had been present in Hispania since the Umayyad conquest in the 8th century. As in other places of the Caliphate, many others embraced Islam. Many Muslims lived in the Iberian Peninsula, called Al-Andalus. They were Arabs, Berbers, or local people who accepted the religion. Even if the Umayyad dynasty collapsed, parts of the peninsula were held by Muslim dynasties in the next centuries, and the Muslim majority existed more in the Spanish part than in the Portuguese part of land. Being the first name on the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal emerged earlier than Spain and formed as a kingdom in the year 1128. This happened after winning an important battle in an effort led by Afonso Henriques, who proclaimed himself King of Portugal in the first half of the 12th century. This was part of Reconquista. He was recognized in 1143 by the King of Leon, Alfonso VII, and in 1179 by the Pope himself. What we know as Spain started with the union of the crowns of Castile and Aragon in 1479, although it was not until 1516 when they had a single unified king. But here is something interesting. In the War of Castilian Succession, Portugal supported Joanna, wife of King Alfonso V of Portugal, and Aragon supported Isabel, wife of Ferdinand, the future King Ferdinand II of Aragon. We may consider this a key point in history because Isabella was recognized as Queen of Castile. If Joanna had won, Portugal and Castile would have been joined together, and Aragon could have remained as an independent kingdom. Until then, the word Hispania was only a geographic location referring exclusively to the Iberian Peninsula. The Constitution of 1876 adopted for the first time the name Spain. Portugal, Castile, and Aragon were allies in the Reconquista, in which they reconquered land from the Muslim Moors, expanding south of the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal's reconquest was fully achieved by 1249, while Castile finished its reconquest in 1492, following the first Spanish voyage of Christopher Columbus to the Caribbean. In 1492, both states began acquiring territory in the New World. As a result of the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, Portugal acquired its most potentially important colony, Brazil. In 1578, King Sebastian of Portugal died in the Battle of Alcácer Quibir against the Moroccans and the Turks. Having no heirs, the king was succeeded by his great-uncle Henry of Portugal, who reigned until his death. Henry also had no heirs, and his death triggered a great succession crisis, where the main claimants to the Portuguese throne were Philip II of Spain and Anthony, Prior of Credo. After the Spanish victory in the War of Portuguese Succession, Philip of Spain was crowned king in 1581, beginning a personal union between the two nations known as the Iberian Union, generating a decline of the Portuguese Empire. During the period of union, the Iberian Union lasted for almost 60 years until 1640, when the Portuguese Restoration War was initiated against Spain, and Portugal re-established the Portuguese dynasty under the Braganza. During the wars of the 18th century, which were often fought by the major powers to maintain the European balance of power, even if Spain and Portugal usually found themselves on opposite sides, the Portuguese, courtesy of their long-standing alliance, aligned themselves with Great Britain, while Spain, throughout the Bourbon family compact, allied themselves with France. In 1762, during the 7 Years' War, Spain launched an unsuccessful invasion of Portugal. In 1777, there was a conflict between the two states over the borders of their possessions in South America. The War of the Oranges happened in 1801, in which Spanish forces, influenced by France, attacked and invaded Portugal. It was a precursor to the Peninsular Wars, resulting in the Treaty of Badajoz, the loss of Portuguese territory, particularly Olivenza, and ultimately setting the stage for the complete invasion of the Iberian Peninsula by Spanish and French forces in 1807. The King of Spain and his French allies successfully invaded Portugal. However, the French decided to take over both countries, overthrowing the King of Spain and forcing the Portuguese royal family to escape to the Portuguese colony of Brazil. Spain and Portugal subsequently became allies for the first time in centuries and allied with the British Army. They managed to get rid of the French by 1813 after a long conflict known as the Peninsular War. France did great damage to Spanish and Portuguese economies, but it wasn't just about that. Their reputation was altered as both lost their American colonies shortly after the end of the Peninsular War, which severely weakened their global power. Following their European struggle, in which kings were overthrown, their own colonial empires in the New World collapsed. Colonies took profit from the internal problems, and through some independence wars, much of the New World was lost. In the next decades after the fall of Napoleon, both countries came close to war a number of times during the early 19th century. Portugal and Spain had been rival sea powers as early as the 14th century. Portugal, initially in a position to explore the area facing the Atlantic, successfully discovered that Africa had been the Arab world's major source of toll brought by camel caravans across the Sahara. But even if Spain and Portugal were rivals, their focus wasn't on their European lands during the Age of Discovery. Most wealth came from abroad. Both Spain and Portugal were more concerned with surveying their new lands. Trading was a good source of money, and the huge intake of American gold was important for the Spanish economy. To create these trade deals, Spain had to defend their overseas possessions. Starting with the 19th century, few plans were created about a possible union between Portugal and Spain. Some tried to spread the idea of Iberism in Portugal to create 7 confederated republics, 5 in Spain, and Lusitania Ulterior and Lusitania Citerior in Portugal. Both the First and Second Spanish Republics had plans to invade Portugal or to create the idea of an Iberian Republic or an Iberian Union. Even the First Spanish Republic designed a federal constitution to include Portugal. The Second Spanish Republic designed a plan to invade Portugal during the Spanish Civil War. This failed as well. Portugal is mostly a hilly and not a very attractive country to conquer centuries ago. Even if there were some attempts, there were many important points that could have changed the history of these two countries. Taking into account the historical context in which both countries were created and how events played out throughout the many centuries of their existence, the reasons for the fact that Portugal wasn't conquered by Spain are many. The lack of a large interest in this land, the focus on the colonies, the diplomacy of Portugal at some points, the decisions that affected the Iberian Union or the previous Union of Castile and Aragon, the Spanish internal problems, as well as other external factors created this situation. If you want to see more videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell button in order to be notified when a new video is uploaded. We would like to give special thanks to our generous supporters on Patreon who make it possible to create these videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.